Welcome to the 2018 Writing at Work Conference. The conference was designed to help, or is designed to help, young writers of any age find a path to writing while working a workaday job. This year we promote community and conversation, removing any barriers between the audience and the participants. No skirted tables and shifting mics, just amazing writers, editors, and publishers in conversation. We have an impressive lineup for you today. And if you look at the screen during breaks, you will find the bios of our distinguished guests. At the end of all the panels except Making Writing Your Business and Women Writing Working Wisdom, we have note cards for your questions. We will collect your questions and read them to each monitor on the half hour, or like just probably about 35 minutes after the hour. You'll find note cards and pens for your use at the end of most of the aisles. So in the paper bags, if you didn't bring your pen and paper. The cap-off panel of the day, Women Writing Working Wisdom, will be uninterrupted 50 minutes of powerful women in discussion about the issues women have faced in the publishing world, and beyond, their triumphs and discouragements, their amazing stories. We are honored to have all of our guests, but I wish to give special acknowledgement to Gary Fiskett-John, who joins us today. Gary Fiskett-John has guided and nurtured the voices of our time. He is singular in his ability to coach, coax, and clarify the manuscripts that have become the greatest books of our generation. You have been influenced by him through Cormac McCarthy, Richard Ford, Donna Tartt, Haruki Murakami, William Kittredge, Thomas McGuane, and more. We are grateful to Tim O'Leary and Michelle Cardinal, who have graciously and generously supported the conference. Tim has long been a supporter of the Creative Writing Program and our students. He is steadfast and loyal. He is also visionary. One of the stories from his collection, Dick Cheney Shot Me in the Face, and Other Tales of Men in Pain, available now through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Unsolicited Press, was recently sold to a Danish producer, and a television series is now in the works. So thank you all for coming, and welcome to our conference.
Well, I'm honored to be moderating our first panel, and we're fortunate to have with us today Sarah Boland and Brian Schott. And Sarah is an agent at Avitas Creative Management, and she joined them in 2017 after spending a decade as an editor of literary fiction and nonfiction at Riverhead Books and Henry Holt and Company. She's edited many acclaimed writers, and including our own Kim Zupan from Missoula here for The Plowman. Sarah's recently made two significant moves, from editing to agenting, and also from New York to Los Angeles. So thanks for joining us today, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
And Brian Schott is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Whitefish Review, a literary journal of mountain culture that has gained national attention for its interviews with Tom Brokaw, Michael Keaton, Jimmy Kimmel, and David Letterman, among others. Brian's also a writer, and his travel and outdoor essays have been featured in Backcountry, Big Sky Journal, Boston Globe, National Geographic, New York Post, and Ski Magazine, among others. And Brian has been editing and publishing the Whitefish Review for 11 years now, right? Brian's also published a lot of work from writers like David James Duncan, Jim Harrison, William Kittredge, and Terry Tempest Williams. But they also work to discover new voices. And Brian and his crew at the Whitefish Review have proven this as they published two of our undergraduates here, Wynn Hungerford and Callie Atkinson. We were just having a conversation downstairs. So thank you, Brian, for your tireless efforts on behalf of literature and for bringing the Whitefish Review to us. That's one of the best things that can happen to any young or beginning writers, to see their work in print alongside those recognizable and admirable names, and we appreciate that. So that brings you up to speed on our panelists, and we're just going to start with a little discussion about how Sarah and Brian came to be, I guess, here. Kind of just a brief origin story, if you'd give it, because I think that's what people are here to find out, is how do we pursue our passion for the written word and pages and craft a life that it enables us to keep doing that in some fashion. So, Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure. Since I'm not a writer, I can talk about how I started in publishing, which I think for most of us here, it starts with reading, of course, and loving books and loving storytelling and the feeling of being transported when you read something and the ability to sort of find friends in storytelling and old kind of enemies sometimes too, I guess. Sort of shorter answer for me is that I was a kid who moved around most of my life. I was a military kid growing up, and books were sort of where my first friends were in terms of every time I moved to a new place. And when I got into the publishing side of things, I didn't realize that you could be an editor, really. I went to college in New York and kind of fell into a great internship, and the world of editing books and working with writers and being an advocate for these stories that sort of change culture or shift culture in fundamental ways, it was so alive to me. So instead of being an academic, I sort of fell into the publishing world. And I started at Riverhead Books, and I stayed there apprenticing with 2 senior level editors, taking on books of my own, working with writers from all over the world, all over the country, publishing translations, publishing emerging voices. And then I moved to Henry Holt about 5 years in to my career, and I was there for about 6 years. And this last year, I've made the switch to agenting because I feel like after 10 years, over 10 years as an editor, learning how to develop work, learning how to advocate for writers, what I really did best as an editor was that full package of cultivating a voice and helping somebody figure out, okay, well, you got this much money for your advance, but what else can we do? How can we help you? How can we connect you to people? How can we get your work out there? How can we put your work into literary magazines? And more, that's the role of the agent in a lot of ways. Some editors still do that work, but it's a combo, it's a team. And moving to Los Angeles, I wanted to get out of the New York bubble. There are stories and voices and important writers everywhere and literary communities everywhere. And I wanted to participate in a different kind of literary community. So I think that's a good short version of the story. There's
Great.
much more to tell.
Thanks. And you'll have a chance to.
There you go.
Fill us in a little bit.
The story of Whitefish Review. Complicated one. When you birth an idea in a Montana ski bar, you're never quite sure what's going to happen. But here we are 11 years later. I was working on a graduate degree in creative writing and got the idea to start the journal. Pitched a few friends in town on the idea, and I don't think they knew what they were getting into at the time. But it's been amazing to watch the progression of it. We called it Whitefish Review because it's grounded in our community in whitefish, but we've always wanted it to do something nationwide. We batted around ideas. Should we call it the Montana Review, this, that, and the other thing? But we really felt like grounding it in our hometown in Whitefish and having the people of Whitefish from the start really support it. But we've gained support, from communities like Missoula and all around the country as well. I was always very grateful to writers who mentored me as I worked through my freelance career. And I wanted to give something back to the community, honestly. It's a nonprofit labor love project, but for me it's all about community building and bringing together artists and writers and photographers together as a community. In the 11 years, we've published about 750 artists and writers. As you mentioned, really paying attention to the youngsters, the up-and-coming, the emerging voices, but publishing them alongside someone like Pete Fromm. It's a pleasure to bump into Callie, who we published when she was 15 years old, and now she's an MFA student. So, I mean, just that brief encounter for me warms my heart a lot, just because we do feel like we are helping the writer along their path.
And when Brian says helping the writers, is what I would like to do is encourage or even challenge the people here today to support not only the Whitefish Review, especially the Whitefish Review, but other literary magazines. Because one thing that kind of frustrates me with a lot of young writers, they're sending out and they're submitting their work to journals, and then you ask them which journals they read, which journals do they subscribe to and support, and there's a long pause. So I think it's part of our responsibility to support and participate in that community and keep those publications going. And Brian talked about the national platform a little bit. The Whitefish Review just won a Reader's Choice Award for the best cover in the Brainiest category from the American Society of Magazine Editors. And another publication, I don't know, something called the New Yorker won too, but I don't know. The Whitefish Review is the main one. So something that you mentioned, Sarah, is it seems to me like editors frequently move into agenting. Or I mean, it's not uncommon for that to happen. When did you decide that maybe that was a move that you were going to make? And I was wondering, you addressed this briefly, but if you could talk about some of the similarities and differences in the two positions.
Sure. I think a lot of editors move into agenting because of the autonomy question. Sort of when you're an editor and when you had positions sort of at literary houses and part of your job is to find new voices and cultivate them, it's an incredible experience. It's an amazing job. I loved being an editor. But you're still churning against a bigger corporation. You're still sort of getting told no about what you can work on or about what you can bring to the list. And part of what I did or tried to do as an editor was push the boundaries of the literary sort of possibilities on the list that I cultivated. So whether that is bringing more voices in translation, I read Spanish, so I started bringing more writers from other parts of the world to the Riverhead list, and now they have this great translation program. They support those writers in a really wonderful way, so that's very gratifying, right? But you bump up against the possibility in the role that you have in terms of which kinds of writers you can bring on. And I think for me, I found that I wanted full autonomy. And I had all of these incredible relationships with writers, whether they are friends of the people that I was working with or new voices or people who were working in a more experimental style. I love writers that challenge form and that sort of push up against the boundaries of what form and storytelling do together. And I wanted more ability to cultivate those voices and to support them, whether as an agent I place them with a small press or whether we find a big 5 publisher for their book. I wanted to be able to do that range. I felt like in your job as an editor, you get to do a lot, but you don't get to do that full broad range. And now I am working with a children's book author, and I'm working on nonfiction, which I didn't really have the possibility to do because my role, and it was a great role, but my role was to bring on new emerging voices in fiction. So that possibility, that sort of broad ability to sort of take and play and work with all kinds of different writers and creators feels really interesting. But then also the other thing that I noticed as an editor was no matter what kind of writer I was working with, I wanted to read, I work with a writer named Sheila Heti who had lots of experimental little projects along the way, but we didn't get to work on those because, you know, not all of her projects were right for Henry Holt, which is the house where I was working at the time. And so I was kind of like, oh, that's a bummer. Her brain is brilliant. It's really interesting. This thing is not for us, but I want to be involved. And so I found that as an editor, no matter what, I was always engaged in all the writing that the writers who I was working with was doing. And so it just made sense for me to transition to the agent side, because as an agent, you kind of cultivate the whole artist, you cultivate the career, and you can do that on the editor side, but there are lots of roadblocks along the way. You have to deal with the publisher as well. I mean, it's your job. So for me, that became clear over the past 5 years or so. But making the switch is difficult in that, you know, you're kind of starting over, or you have these wonderful relationships with the writers that you're working with on the house side, but they also have wonderful agents. So what do? You know, you can't just take all of those people. But it has been, you know, making the break. When I knew that I was ready to leave New York, it just seemed like the right time to make this change. So it has changed my perspective, but the work is very, very similar in terms of what I was doing as an editor anyway. I still do a lot of developmental editing. I still do a lot of structural editing. I work with the writers that I represent on their short fiction, on their essays, on, you know, I'm representing a writer who is a poet who just started writing prose. She's working on a story collection, but we're placing her new collection of poems at a bigger publisher in Canada. She's Canadian. So, you know, I'm working on the full range of things, and I think that feels really powerful and exciting to me, and also it means that I'll keep my list pretty small so that I can do that for every single person that I work with.
Great.
Is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And Brian, you said you started the Whitefish Review 11 years ago, beginning in a bar. What made you decide that was the time to start the Whitefish Review?
Well, as I had said, I had just come out of graduate school. I really had that buzz of energy from that experience. And again, you know, I wanted to do something that would keep me inspired, honestly. You know, I put my my life together working about 6 different jobs. The Writing Coaches of Montana is one of them. Bev's here, who works on that project here in Missoula. So I wanted Whitefish Review, you know, from a personal standpoint, to be inspiring for me as a young writer. It also really, again, it introduced me to so many other great writers in the writing community, and I've always been blown away by the established authors, what they will do to help the young writer as well. A great example is issue number 1, when we were kicking around the idea to start the journal. I penned a letter, popped it in the mail to Bill Kittredge, just saying, hey Bill, we have this idea, maybe we could do an interview with you. Do you have something in your sock drawer? Maybe you'd let us publish. And to swear, 2 days later, phone rings, hey, this is Bill Kittredge. You know, I was like, what? And again and again and again, I'm blown away by the people that we ask to help us inevitably say yes. And again, you know, the writing life is a lonely life in some regards, and, you know, creating that community, creating that energy, you know, just sitting in a room with fellow artists and writers is powerful. And I really wanted to get into the mind of the artist. What makes the artist tick, you know, whether it's a poet, whether it's a fiction writer, and the visual arts as well that we've included in this. So, yeah, some days I wake up and I think, man, it's such a terribly difficult project, honestly. As a nonprofit, trying to get distribution. We did get into Barnes and Noble stores for this new issue, which is kind of a fun story. You know, they called us and said, hey, can we take a look at what you're doing? We shipped off copies, and they said they wanted to carry it. So we've been put into 160 Barnes and Nobles around the nation right now. And I think that's great news for the writers that we publish as well. You know, they're out there, so it's fun to be a part of that process.
Yeah, and I think a testament to what you do at the Whitefish Review and the respect it has. I know it was really important to to Jim Harrison that one of the last interviews he did, was with the Whitefish Review, and
Yeah, we feel lucky to have been able to do that. Ben Polly did that interview, and yeah, Jim recognized, I think, part of the Whitefish Review's kind of soul that we don't take ourselves super seriously, honestly. We're doing high quality work at all times, and we're very, very proud of the work that we publish. But we have a little edge too, like Jim had.
Yeah.
And he recognized that, and that was fun to see.
Well, one thing that that comes up from what you've both said, I think for young or beginning writers, a lot of times agents or editors are seen as our partners, but also as gatekeepers somehow. And you, if you can just get through this or past this hurdle. And I wondered if each of you, Sarah as an agent or editor, and Brian as an editor, do you just have an instant when somebody's work crossed your desk that quickened your pulse that you hadn't heard of before? And I think it's just important that we remember, like, you want to bring good work onto the page. We want to produce good work to put on the page. And if you could just share a time when that might have happened.
Sure. I think, talking about what Brian's saying about community and publishing in these magazines and finding people who are advocates for your work is one of the most important things that you can do early on. One of the first books that I took on as an editor, so a while ago now, was after reading a writer in a literary magazine in One Story. Her name was Ramona Acebel. She wrote this story called Safe Passage that was about a ship full. She's kind of a surrealist, fabulous writer, and it was about a ship full of grandmothers kind of sailing into what we assume is the afterlife. And it had this magical, bizarre quality, and I had never read a story quite like it before. And so I was building a list. I had acquired a couple books, but I wasn't by any means, a fancy or senior level person at the company. And I pursued her for 2 years. And she was traveling around the world with her family, and she came to New York occasionally, and we sat and we had coffee, and then about 2 years later, I helped her find an agent, and then we signed up 2 of her books. I mean, that kind of thing happened because she put her work out there, and people came to it. And I read lots of different journals, all kinds of, the full gamut. You read the stories that are in the New Yorker and all of those things, but I read, I'm reading the Whitefish Review now, and I'm reading, and I am on the board of a journal that is based out of Brooklyn called Slice Magazine, which is one of the journals that I read a lot. So I'm constantly looking for people, new voices that way, because you can wait for somebody to query you, or you can wait for a writer to recommend their friend or something like that. But I know what I like or what gets me excited better than anybody. So I want to go out and find it. And I did that as an editor too. And now as an agent, it just feels a little closer. It's the first step instead of, a couple steps down the line.
I think that's a problem that most writers would like to have as an editor pursuing them for 2 years.
Yeah, yeah. She was a little bit like, oh, who is this woman? What is she doing? Why? Because she didn't have books yet. She had 6 stories, and she was halfway through a novel. And I was like, okay, Mona, I'll wait. And Riverhead still publishes her, which is exciting. She's on her 4th book just came out last week, and it's another collection of stories.
Great.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I love that you say, that you pay attention to these small presses and actively look for those writers. I emailed you that quote that Ray Carver said that, the small presses are the backbone of the American literature,
Really?
of the national literature. And, even a writer like Carver, as he was getting started out, sending submissions off to the small journals, to the small magazines, kind of slowly working his way through. And I just love that quote that, what we're doing, is contributing to the backbone of the national literature. So thank you for paying attention.
I'm trying.
In this most recent issue, Reg Darling, he's a writer out of Vermont. When that essay came across our desk, it takes your breath away. It's experimental in form. It's very dark. But that's, if you read Reg's essay in this, you'll see what I mean. And I think we'll see Reg come out with a book, and maybe this be part of that as well. But it's about his life as a social worker, and it's pretty intense. But we always, the editorial crew that I have about 20 different people reading the submissions that come in. I did a quick calculation the other day, and we've had about 6,000 submissions come in over our decade or so.
Wow.
So it takes a lot of power, a lot of man and woman power to go through it. We take it very seriously in terms of paying attention, making sure that we have multiple readers on it. Sometimes you'll be in kind of a foul mood or something, and you might dismiss a story just because of the mood that you're in. But someone else starts paying attention, they're like, you got to go take a look at that again. So we really do have multiple eyes on everything. And then when we advance stories later on, we have sometimes up to 6 to 12 readers on something as well. So it's a fun, laborious process. But again, it goes back to I think we're contributing to the writer's life, and that we will see great things out of some of these people that we've published.
Great. Sarah, in an interview with Slice, that interview that I was looking at, you mentioned that you're oftentimes surprised at the point where a writer secures representation from an agent, how early in the process they do that. And I know that differs between writers or what agents are looking for, but when do you think is an appropriate time for a writer to start querying and seeking representation? Anyway, yeah, go ahead with that.
Sure. I think in that interview, or my thoughts in general about when somebody finds an agent, you kind of have to know yourself a little bit. I think there are some writers that are influenced too early by the business, and that is my concern about, there are kind of tons of agents. So when I started thinking about moving to the agent side, I was like, the last thing the world needs is another literary agent. What am I doing? But I kind of, I kept coming back to the idea that, I have this experience on the other side, and hopefully I can offer something to writers to sort of help cultivate things without pushing them in a direction that is kind of oriented to sales. So my concern about writers getting an agent too early is that, okay, you're in the middle of creating work, you're sort of finding your voice, you're doing this thing, and now you have the business kind of in your ear in a weird way. So how are you taking the comments of your agent differently than hopefully you find an agent who understands your work, who sees the project of what you're doing and wants to help you kind of find that endpoint that you had in mind for yourself. But you're probably also very excited about the business coming to you, or sort of having somebody to help you navigate it. And I think that feeling about making work that is going to sell or whatever is a really difficult one, because the marketplace is just very strange and it's up and down. And if somebody talks to you about, well, here's a trend that you should write to, my advice is don't sign with that agent, because you have to figure out what you're doing first, and then you have to find somebody who is the right sort of fit, who you have a really good gut feeling about, who understands how you want to work and what you want for the work that you're making. So really, my advice about starting to find an agent is if people reach out to you, if you publish in a couple good journals and in some journals that other people are reading, and an agent writes to you and says, hey, I really loved that story, I think that you have to decide, if they offer you representation based on one story, what that actually means. Are you is this person, are they being sincere? Are they aware of the rest of the work that you're doing? Are you having a conversation about sort of a bigger direction of where you're going to go? And you know, I've certainly signed up writers after reading 4 stories, or signed up people when they don't have a full manuscript, but that was after months of series of conversations where it's like, take your time, work on this thing, come back to me when you're ready, I'll be here. You know, I don't think writers should be pressured into signing before they have a clear idea of what they're doing. And because there are so many agents out there, I feel like agents are sort of calling people or reaching out earlier in the process. And that's good that you have interest, but I think it's difficult to resist. But you'll have more choice down the line if you cultivate your project and then you come back to that person and say, you were the first one, here it is, I'm giving you a couple of days head start, but I'm also submitting to these 5 agents who have always been my dream, you know? So I think you just have to wait until your project feels kind of as ready as possible before you start really sending out. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And Brian, like at the Whitefish Review, when do you think writers should start submitting their work to literary journals? I mean, I know that's kind of an open-ended question, but it seems like the young writers I see either aren't submitting or they're submitting maybe too early in the process. And you said you've had 6,000 submissions. What percentage of those do you think are ready to?
You know, it's always such a difficult process, especially when you send out those rejection notices. And you know, I had a question in a class yesterday about how do you handle the rejections, and my answer was, you know, very delicately, but from the heart as well. I mean, I think any writer should start submitting to journals, and when they feel they're ready to test the waters, and when they're ready to get rejected many times and not give up. You gotta have such thick skin to be in the game, and really persistence, you know? You know, Rick Bass kind of likens the writing game as like a boxing match, you know, like the amount of energy it takes and the oxygen it takes. And he's made me actually think about all, like, what your brain really needs to really get into it. And but writers should submit when you feel you're ready to get rejected.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
And maybe when those rejections aren't going to, if you get somebody who gives you a note about a story, when you can process that and be like, that's a good note or that's not a good note. Yeah. Like when you can be protective of the work that you're making too, right?
You gotta believe in yourself.
Totally.
You can't, you know, I see, you know, if a rejection notice is gonna crush you, you're probably in the wrong game.
Yeah.
And you're not ready to put yourself out there. And you know, it's got to come from the heart. You got to believe you got what it takes, and persistence. There's actually a writer that we ended up publishing in the review who emailed me after we had rejected him like 4 different times. And his note was cool. It was like, hey, I'm feeling kind of pissed off.
Like, yeah.
And you know, it got my attention, and he was eventually published on his own merit, but he was persistent, and
Yeah.
it paid off. And you got to be persistent, like saying, you can't have the word no in your vocabulary too much in terms of you got to believe in yourself and go for it.
And that's one thing, like Sarah mentioned, I guess, if we can call them such thing, an encouraging rejection or some encouragement from an editor or an agent. And I know when I first started submitting, it was kind of hard to distinguish those. And I always tell young writers, if you get any encouragement from somebody, get them some more work that's a little better. Editors don't say they want to see more to be kind. They say that because they want to see more.
Yeah.
And when you talk about rejections, I know one time in a workshop somebody was talking about rejections, and Bill Kittredge said, hell, when I started, I didn't feel alive if I wasn't getting 5 rejections a week. You know? And so I think that, yeah, to embrace all parts of that
Yeah.
process is
And
important.
even when you have an agent, you get rejections too. Not every agent will send out stories, but I feel like because, I want to be that career builder and be sort of part of a writer's career from the ground up, I do send out stories. I don't send to every magazine, but I send to places where I have relationships with editors, and I get those letters and I'm like, well, you're an idiot, obviously, and we'll try you again. But it's funny. It's tough. You have to keep going. And I just had a situation where we just got placed a story of this writer Suvankam Thamavangsa in the May issue of Harper's, and it was after sending them 5 other stories of hers, and they kept saying, we love her voice, we're interested, this isn't quite right for us. This is, and I was like, all right, guys, we're running out of stories here, and they took the one that surprised me. Quite frankly, it's the weirdest one, and I was like, all right, good for you, Harper's. It was really exciting. So you never know, and I think persistence on every level is part of the game.
Definitely. We want to leave a little time for questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, so you going to collect any questions, or if you have some, go ahead and start writing them down, or is that how we were going to handle that, Brooke? Oh. Yeah, and in the meantime, I guess the title of our panel is Publishing and the New West, so I don't know how much we've addressed that, but I think it's interesting that, both of you are working out of the West now, and it seems like ever since the dawn of the internet, there's been this idea that anybody can do anything from anywhere, and that probably hasn't happened yet, but do you see that changing I think New York will probably always be the hub of publishing, but it seems like now there are more agents, more publications operating out of the West Coast. There's LA, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. There's a vibrant literary scene in all of those cities, and in Missoula, we believe that we have one here too.
Yeah.
And I think both of you are examples of that and contributing to that. Do you see that continuing to grow?
I mean, I hope so. I think part of what New York publishing houses will be in New York because of lots of budget constrictions and just that the offices are there and all of that. That's where they will be. But writers more and more can't afford to be there. I mean, it's rough there. So it used to be that, I don't know, tons of writers would come and you could make a life, you could make a living. And now editors and agents are finding that, this is not a business where we're sort of making money hand over fist. And it's a hard city to have a life in. And I had to make that hard choice of like, I want to have a life, but I love this work. And there are stories everywhere. And it was so important to me, especially I think from growing up, moving around and seeing so many different places. I just felt like the way, especially sort of the literary kind of world in New York was so looking so inwardly sometimes. And I was just like, it'll be good for everybody to have people sort of breaking out of that, who can bring other voices in and sort of pay more attention to different writers. And since I've been in LA, I've signed up 3 people who I met just from being in that community. And it's kind of an amazing way to discover work and to discover voices and to hear from different people who are telling stories from all over the place. I don't know, that's always been really important to me, and I feel like that has always been reflected in the kind of books that I worked on as an editor, and I hope will be reflected in the kind of books that I help writers make as an agent. But I do think also we're seeing some amazing books that are coming from the West, in the past couple of years. I'm thinking of, writers like Claire Vaye Watkins and and people coming out of this program. And I don't know, I think, and I've seen a lot of books sell recently. So in 2019, there are going to be some big westward looking stories. And that feels really exciting because there's lots to tell, lots to see, lots of sort of questions to ask, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, we, typically publish probably 50% of the work comes from Montana writers, the other half from all over the nation. Although we really do explore kind of the landscape of the human condition, our journal is again grounded in the power of place. I moved from near Boston, Massachusetts as a young man, came out to Montana, and I think it's kind of a common story. You don't really expect to stay, but something grabs you about the mountains and the power of the land, and I guess I've really wanted to explore that with Whitefish Review as well. What is it about? Why was I washing dishes as a college grad in Whitefish, Montana? Because I loved the mountains so much, and Glacier National Park, and what does it do for our souls? So again, power of place for Whitefish Review, but certainly writers from all over the country are experiencing that in their own way.
Did you have a model publication or journal that you kind of looked to when you founded the Whitefish Review, that you thought, okay, if we could get to this point, or what do you see as your sister publications now?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, I didn't study the landscape very closely, almost purposely. I think I actually might have chickened out if I had really taken a real close look at the number of literary magazines. I studied, I've always regarded Plowshares as sort of the go-to for quality. Tin House magazine, certainly. The things that Dave Eggers has been doing with McSweeney's and that type of thing. But again, I wanted to create our own unique identity, and I do feel that's why Whitefish Review has done relatively well, because we have created this unique identity that people of a certain bent have gravitated to.
Yeah, and you said you might not have started had you known what you were getting into, and I don't think anybody would start a literary magazine if they fully knew what they were getting into. I'll get through a few questions here as we can. The first one, I guess, will be directed toward you, Sarah. Please expand on the query process. How does one choose who to send a query letter to? How many query letters at one time should a writer submit?
Good question. I think you choose the agents that you're going to query by finding out the agents who represent the writers who you love, or the writers who've inspired your work, or the writers who are making work, and you want to be considered amongst them. So how do you do that? Well, the internet helps in some ways to sort of Google, that writer agent. I do that a lot. There are websites called Publishers Marketplace where you can log on and find some of that information. Also, the acknowledgments sections in the back of your favorite books. Usually, if the relationship is good, they will thank their agent and their editor and a million other people that have supported their work along the way. And I think that's a really good way to find how many people should you query. It's totally up to you. I have heard lots of different strategies about that. I think that you maybe query 3 from your top list of 5 or 10, 3 from your B list, and 3 from your C list. Because what you don't want to do is sort of send the work only to the best agents that you possibly can, and then you get all of these notes that are like, this is great, but we have big questions about this one thing, and then you're like, oh crap, like I should have fixed that one thing before you sent it to all of the top people. So I recommend sort of scaffolding a little bit about, how you send in the first round and what you do. That's obviously up to you or where you think the work is. Yeah, I mean, I've also heard stories where you send it to one person and they love it and take you on immediately. So it really, this whole process is about how you feel comfortable, or how you want it to go. So I think you have to look at, okay, well, how much waiting can you take, and how long do you want it to take, and all of that, and send out accordingly.
Yeah, great. Yeah, when we talk about when to submit, I guess, to agents or editors, I remember Richard Ford once said that something was ready to send it out. If it came back rejected, you wouldn't say, oh, I knew that was wrong with it.
Yes, absolutely.
It should be revealed to you, new
Yeah.
information if something's wrong with it.
I think the biggest sort of bummer, for a writer can be that, I read something and I say, this is really interesting, I like your work, blah, 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 but I have a question about this. And the biggest sort of thing that kind of makes me feel, sad for that writer is when they say, yeah, I thought maybe I should have worked on that more. And you're like, well, do it. Don't send it to me. You don't need me to tell you, you know this already. So I think it's really important to have a peer group, and what you can get out of an MFA program or a writing group or any kind of great readers that for your work who can help you see those things and help point that stuff out before you send it to somebody like me, because you get a first impression once and you want to make sure that you've done everything you possibly can before I point out the thing that you already know.
Great. Brian, I'll give you this question. Somebody wants to know, of writers, what percentage are liberal, what percentage are conservative, and does that correlate at all with financial success or success in publishing?
Wow.
Wow. I have never had that question.
Is this Jeopardy?
Well, we always, if we're liberal, we always think there's a conservative bias. If we're conservative, we always think there's a liberal bias. Do you see any trend or bias in publishing?
We've certainly we do publish some of our interviews and work online, and one of the haters wrote, those left-leaning Whitefish reviewers, So I don't know. I guess we are certainly a more liberal, left-leaning publication in some of our beliefs, but we are also inclusive. It would be interesting to publish a really well-written conservative piece on the merits of something perhaps I don't necessarily believe in, but if it was well-written and well-argued, we would love to publish it.
Yeah. Great. Sarah, I'll give you this question's directed to you. You said the marketplace is strange. Can you say more? How so? Is it stranger now than before, or is it stranger than ever? It seems like publishing, they always said, oh, if we could just go back 10 years.
Yeah, I don't know. Everybody wants to go back 10 years. I feel like, no, let's go forward. Let's figure out what we need to do differently going forward. Let's stop going back. I think there are some really interesting things that are happening in publishing now. I think there is a big move on a corporate level at a lot of organizations, and also just in the work that people are publishing, to publish more women, to publish more people of color, to publish more voices from disabled writers. That is a thing that feels important and that has been forward-looking. So in terms of what the marketplace is doing, that feels really positive. Not strange, great. But like a marketplace, what the problem that I see and why it's strange always to me is that what we're doing is where art meets commerce, right? And who knows what that actually means in the long term. So everybody freaked out 5 years ago when it was like, ebooks are gonna kill everything. Well, they didn't, so we're still here. And in fact, print book sales are actually up a little bit this year. And you see, sort of because everybody freaked out about ebooks, now we have these higher quality print books. Like, I don't know if anybody has been paying attention to the design quality of the hardcover books that you're actually holding in your hand, but publishers are spending more money on those printed books. The design quality is higher. The paper quality is going back, to 15 years ago when we were using like a different stock of paper that is a little bit more expensive. So there are all these things that are moving forward in an interesting direction. When I think that the market is weird, it's that people are distracted right now by what is happening in the rest of the world. I think a lot of people are reading nonfiction in a way that they haven't in a long time, and I'm thankful for that because we need to tell those stories. We need investigative reporters to be out there, like looking at what's really happening in the world. But it means that you only have X number of hours in your life to read a book. So are you reading as much fiction as you used to be? Probably not. So the fiction, selling pieces of fiction in the past 2 years has, I think, gotten a little bit harder, but we see that shifting a little bit. So my job is really to pay attention to the market and to figure out how to sell an incredible piece of work no matter what the market is doing. So it's weird, it's strange, it's always going to be strange in one way or another. And I don't say that to discourage you, but just that it's unpredictable in terms of what we can do and how we can do it. But the good news is that small publishers, these independent presses, are doing incredible work that is the backbone of what, voices are getting traction. And those publishers are getting the attention of big publishers in a way that they haven't in many years. So big publishers are starting to do more experimental work and more interesting things too. I think that is a very positive thing that I'm seeing. I don't want to leave you with it's just weird. But that is a very positive thing that's happening. So that has me very encouraged in the past year or so.
Great. Brian, how do you manage your time or life as a writer or editor, working on developing your own work, sending it out and submitting it, and also stewarding the Whitefish Review?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly the publishing and the editing, certainly has taken its toll on my own writing. But I decided to invest my energy in this project as a legacy project of sorts, and I'm now on the hunt for the new generation to take over a lot of the duties that I have done, and I'm actually kind of on the search for some young blood. Because I do have some longer book projects that I want to get back to, that I want to spend my time. But the Whitefish Review has been produced at very odd hours, very late at night. I have two young boys that we chase around, my wife and I, and so busy time. Haven't slept enough in many years, but I always say to people, well, I can just stop doing it. We can just stop if it's not fun. It's been a blast, honestly, and just the connections and the energy that's been created by it has really kept me going. And I'll come out of this energized again, and so it's good.
Well, please don't stop, and I'll help shepherd some young blood your way.
There you go.
We have a lot of students here who are interested in editing or agenting as much as writing. They want to have a life in letters, in books, and that's always encouraging to me as a teacher to see the passion they have, not only for their own work, but the work of their peers and contemporaries. So I think we're nearing the hour, and we probably want to stay on schedule. And I just really like to thank Sarah and Brian for being here in Missoula and being up here today, and thank all of you for attending. And we look forward to a great afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you.